Hello, and thank you for joining us on our first ever live stream event. I apologize if this doesn't go as well as we hoped. I'm Steve Wilcox, and I'm joined by 45 North athlete Jill Martindale. Jill, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me, Steve. I'm super excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this goes without saying, and I'll preface by saying Jill is an all-around badass cyclist, but it's 45 North. So right now we're focusing on the fact that she is a winter ultra endurance athlete. She participates in races ranging from short stuff like the Fat Bike Birkie, um, all the way to the Iditarod Trail Invitational. She's a course record holder for the Arrowhead 135 and the Fat Pursuit 200, as I believe you're the only female to have finished that course. Is that correct?
There were actually two other women that finished the year that I finished, Missy Schwartz and Kelly Nelson, who are both very badass as well. Um, but yeah, that was the first year that any women have finished the 200-mile Fat Pursuit. It was a tough year, but it was fun.
That's insane. Very cool. And then, more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but more recently, your massive accomplishment of completing the ITI 1000 and not only completing it, but winning it alongside Peter Inneman and Casey Fagerquist.
I think that's how you say it. Sorry,
Yeah.
Casey. You'd think after spending over 22 days, 7 hours, and however many minutes with Casey and Peter that I would know how to say Casey's last name correctly.
I think maybe 1,000 miles across Alaska, there might have been more immediate things to talk about, maybe immediate concerns. Um, so yeah, I mean, 1,000 miles across Alaska. What made you decide you wanted to do that?
Well, I've always really loved bike packing and long distance riding. You can blame it on my dad. He took us on our first bike packing trip when I was a freshman in high school. And I mean, we went like 50 miles a day, and my mom carried all of our stuff with us, but it was really fun. And when I started racing fat bikes, it was just kind of a complete fluke. The bike shop that I worked at was slower in the winter, so I was able to take more time off, and I wanted to get into racing. And I just really loved being on the bike all day long and riding in the snow, and it just became my favorite way to ride.
That is cool. So this is kind of a long time coming, an ITI 1000 in the making for sure.
Mhm.
Um, how exactly does someone prepare for something like that?
Uh, it's it's a lot of practicing with your gear. Definitely, you have to, have the fitness level to be able to ride your bike all day long. And I took up running to get better at it. I took up kettlebell swings and doing a little bit more like weight training. Not a lot of it. I like to have a lot of purposeful stuff. So instead of just running by myself or on a treadmill, I'll take the dogs out on a run. But primarily, the biggest way to prepare is just to mentally get used to using your gear, and don't set too many expectations. Don't think you're going to go out there and completely kill it, because everything is just so dependent on snow conditions. But definitely learning how to work on my bike, learning, different layers, the different gloves that I might want to wear at specific temperatures, learning what the snow does. Just spending a lot of time outside is kind of, I think, the best way to prepare.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, over the course of 22 days, and who knows what conditions you're gonna come into or what sort of wildlife. I can only imagine that you can't exactly prepare for everything. So once you were in the thick of it, what was that experience like? I mean, what kind of gear is needed to make it through those long days and nights? And what were the temperatures like?
So one thing I should have mentioned previously on how do you get into fat bike riding, I just thought of it. You do have to qualify for the Iditarod. trail invitationals. So you've got to do, X amount of races before the 1,000 mile. And before you do the 1,000 mile, you have to do the 350. So just qualifying for that race in itself is a really great way to learn how all of your gear works. And then you've got to have, the right boots, because at Iditarod, it got to negative 65 degrees. So I like to use the 45 North Wolfgar boots. Just they're rated for negative 25, but if you are hydrated and well fed, if you've got a set of gaiters and you're covering your shins and staying warm that way, that's a really great way to keep your feet warm. And a lot of it is you've got to be self-aware too. A lot of people will get frostbite on their fingertips or on their toes because they're not thinking and constantly checking in with themselves. So having all the right gear definitely helps. I took with me 3 different types of gloves, the 45 North Merino wool liner, the Sternfist 5s, and the Sternfist 4s. So the Sternfist 4s were for inside of my pogies for, the coldest temps. That's what you want to roll with. But the warmest it got was in the 30s, and we had some like slushy rain and high winds. So the merino wool liner was really great on, those warmer days. So it's just having the whole range and knowing that it could get to negative 65 with 60-mile-per-hour winds, or it could be 38 degrees in a bluebird day, and it's just anything can happen.
That's insane. And thank you for all of those lovely plugs. I appreciate that.
Got a wrap.
um, so that's the gear. That's how cold it gets. Um, what was your most memorable experience during the whole thing?
It it's so hard to just pick one. So for me, one of the highest moments was all the great food that we got to have on the trail. As silly as it may be, there was a dead moose on the side of the river, and after just a bunch of really long, hard days with the sky and the snow being the same color, seeing a dead moose on the side of the trail kind of felt like a victory. Because the
Whatever you
moose
need
were
to shake things up.
yeah, they were like one of the scariest parts of the whole trail. Early on in the race before McGrath, the moose were starting to attack some of the race participants, just because there had been so much snow and the snow was so deep. So the moose were hungry and cranky and hangry, and they were going after some of the other riders. So seeing a dead moose on the side of the Yukon River was just kind of like, yeah, take that, moose. Which, I mean, it's just the little things that are exciting. There was a time that we were riding through the Topcock Hills before the very last safety cabin before Nome, and it was really cold and raining on us and dark. And it was just hill after hill. One hill went up for like a mile. I was watching my Garmin, and it was just, yeah, it was sloggy. So you had to just push your bike up this hill, and then you could kind of ride down, but it was so windy. You had to also just like work really hard to get down. When we got to the cabin, it was stocked with firewood. So after like a 19-hour horrible push, yeah, it was like 100 degrees inside of that cabin. It was so warm, and we were just so happy to be dry and to have firewood there. Casey and Peter told me I was being pretty ridiculous because I was just so close to the camp stove, and I was eating some cinnamon, like a piece of cinnamon cake that they made for us in White Mountains, and it had cranberries and like cream cheese frosting, and I was just sitting in the bunk just being like, that was like all I could do. But it was good. There's just so many amazing little details, and getting all the pictures together and sending them to you for this just brought up a ton of memories that I had forgotten about all summer. So that was pretty great.
Oh, good. I'm glad we got to do that then. Yeah, it was great looking through them, and some of them are actually on screen right now. So
Oh, awesome.
the folks tuning in get to check them out as well. Um, so you haven't really mentioned other people yet. How often did you run into other people along the way? Is that a rarity or?
Kind of. So the villages were spaced anywhere from 50 miles to like 90 miles apart. So there weren't a ton of the villagers that we got to see, especially after Uniclete, because of the pandemic. A lot of people kind of stayed inside of the villages, but we were able to see people at all of the Iditarod checkpoints. They kind of took us under their wing once the villages started to kind of shut down. Um, but the locals they were my favorite. I don't know. I had a lot of favorite parts, but the locals like really made it special. We rolled into Ophir, which is the first checkpoint after McGrath, essentially. Like before Ophir, you get to Takatna, and Takatna was great. We had some burgers, and the locals were starting to prepare the checkpoint for the Iditarod sled dog race. So they were like, "Oh, we didn't know you were coming. Let us fry you up some burgers quick." And the burger was still kind of like half frozen when they gave it to us, and the bun was kind of frozen and soggy. And the guy who made it for us, super nice guy, but he was like, "How's your burger?" And I was like, "It's really good, thank you." You know, being very polite because they didn't want money for it.
Sure.
Um, and he was like, "No, you don't have to lie. It's shit." And so like I start cracking up, and he's like, "It's no McDonald's burger." Just like that was like the top tier, like the best burger in the world is McDonald's. So that was a great moment. And then we got to Ophir, and the people at that checkpoint there gave us king crab and cookies. And it was
Wow.
amazing. It was my first time ever eating king crab. So it was just really magical. Every time you got to a village, everybody was so generous. And
That's
I just,
that's fantastic.
yeah, I was blown away.
Well, and actually, I don't know that we mentioned this yet. You had mentioned the villages were starting to shut down. To set the stage, this happened when the pandemic was really starting to kick off, correct?
Yeah.
So, what was it like going through that, sort of being so far away from it, but then coming into contact with these villages, and like what were their thoughts on the whole thing? These
Um,
strangers coming through.
some of the villages didn't want anything really to do with us. So like through one of the villages, we got to go up to the school, which is where we were supposed to be sleeping and staying. So we had mailed our drop boxes to the school, and we rolled through, and we had to basically like get a hold of somebody without like touching the door of the school, and then they made us stand way back, and then they kind of just like threw our drop boxes for us, and then told us to just leave the boxes next to the school. So that was interesting. But there were some people that really stuck their necks out for us. So Peace on Earth Pizza and in Uniclete, we still got to stay there and sleep there, which is awesome because it's like this pizza parlor, and they just sling pizzas all night long for the Iditarod sled dog teams.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we just like I think Casey slept on the floor, I slept on a bench. Peter might have slept like underneath the table, and they were just making pizzas the whole time. Um, and they made us a pizza. A couple of our friends had called ahead and paid so that when we showed up, there was like pizza on the house, which was really neat too. Um, and in White Mountain, they stuck their necks out for us, even though we weren't allowed to stay in the house where we were supposed to be staying. They let us take a nap inside of the jailhouse.
Okay, that's an interesting experience.
So they had made us like a big pot of moose chili and just like a bunch of baked goods and even some like fresh like peppers and stuff like that. And
Were there any other inmates there at the time, or?
no, they like cleared out. Like they like rode a snow machine to let us in and then just like left and then told us to like let them know when we were leaving so that they could come and like disinfect the place. But
Wow.
yeah, when we were in McGrath, people were talking about the coronavirus, and I kind of just thought everybody was um, I don't know, blowing it out of proportion, kind of like the swine flu or like the bird flu. I just thought it was another flu essentially. And so I was like,
Hmm.
whatever, like we'll get vaccines, it'll be fine. Um, and then every time we got to a village, it would be like a couple days in between and a couple days in between. And we knew things were serious when they were shutting down sports and when Tom Hanks and his wife got the coronavirus. It was, we, I don't know, I cried a bunch of times because I thought we were going to get pulled from the course. So,
Wow. Yeah, that adds a whole new level to that event.
mhm.
Wow. Well, so I mean, you've won it during a pandemic. Are you going back and like what would bring you back to do it again?
I think I just need some time. This pandemic's been difficult. Uh, we were both, my husband and I were both laid off from our jobs when I got back. And then, like, I got so focused on going out to Iditarod that I put off a bunch of things like around the house that I should have been doing. Um, I don't have a car right now because my car broke. But the good news is I am getting a new car soon, which is
Good.
going to be great. It's going to be awesome. But it's been like saving money, getting stuff done on the house, spending time with Dan and the dogs, taking care of all the stuff that like I neglected and didn't prioritize over the last couple of years. So this pandemic, I don't know if mentally I would have been able or financially been able to go and do the southern route this year. But I really want to do the southern route next. I'm very excited for it.
Southern
Um,
Route. All right.
yeah, I know we had talked about it earlier, um, about that book, Race Across Alaska, that a friend had given me to read before I went out for the 1,000 mile. And so Race Across Alaska is by Libby Riddles, and she's the first woman who won the Iditarod sled dog race. So a friend had gifted me that book when she knew that I was doing the 1,000 mile Iditarod, and I didn't really, even though I like set the course record at Arrowhead or I've won Tuscobia before, I didn't really take myself too seriously. And then I read that book by Libby Riddles, and that's when I realized like a woman can win the Iditarod. Like it's possible. And the book was amazing. And every checkpoint, a lot of the villages, it's the same volunteers still working the checkpoints that were working at the year that Libby won. Um, so that was, I don't know, that was really cool. So even though it is a pandemic, and even though it like broke me to do the 1,000 mile Iditarod, it was still really fun and beautiful. And Alaska is really raw and wild, and for me, it's, I don't know, it's just worth it to go out there. So I want to go again, and I want to go a lot of
That's
times.
very cool.
I don't know.
Very cool. No, it has to be an extremely good book too. Now I want to read it because if you can
It's
just
pretty
read
good.
it and go win the ITI 1000 because it was that
Yeah,
motivating.
yeah. It's very cute. She takes care of the dogs, and it's adorable. Um, but like I learned a lot and I've learned so much from the Winter Ultra community too. But um, like one of the things that I would say is take care of yourself out there. Be patient. Slow is fast. Um,
Mhm.
I learned to be patient and to take care of myself essentially at every checkpoint instead of trying to rush through. So every time I rode through an aid station, I needed to make sure that I ate whatever they had. I couldn't leave until I went to the bathroom, and I couldn't leave until all my stuff was dry. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, 22 days out there, you can't exactly just push yourself to the limit every day. You've got to be feeling good, sort to some extent, the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
If you put yourself in a hole, it's going to be really hard to dig on out of it. So
Gotcha. So obviously, we've mentioned the pandemic. I mean, how can you not? But with all of this, obviously not going back to ITI this year, but this is going to change the season. So, what does your season look like coming up here? What are you excited for? What are your plans?
so the first event that's gonna happen, I guess, the Tuscobia Winter Ultra did get canceled this year because of the pandemic. But there's this group of women on Facebook who do winter ultras called the Wild Winter Women. And they're all kind of virtually doing either 160 miles or 80 miles the same week that the Tuscobia Winter Ultra was supposed to be happening. So I've been able to rope a couple of friends into riding 160 miles on January 2nd, which is going to be really fun. And in true Tuscobia fashion, we're going to be on a rail trail. So it's kind of straight and flat for a ways. And then 80 miles out, we're going to touch a sign, turn around, and roll back,
That's great.
which is going to be really fun. Uh, Arrowhead, I did not sign up for. I wasn't feeling super optimistic that I was going to be able to get to Arrowhead. And they haven't canceled it. It may still happen, and I really hope that it does. But I was planning on riding 135 miles the same day that Arrowhead is taking off, just to kind of still do the mileage and still do an adventure. Fat Pursuit is doing a virtual event now because of the pandemic. So I wanted to sign up for that and virtually, compete with everybody else that's doing that. So a lot of it is just kind of sticking closer to home, but still doing some really fun adventures, which is going to be cool. And then this is the second year that my husband and I have put on a winter training camp called the Winter Shakedown, which I am very lucky to have 45 North support to do that event. But
Happy to support
essentially,
it.
yeah, it was so much fun last year. We capped it at 30 participants, and we do a gear check, a water boil. We rode about 40. Well, the route was 40 miles, but we got huge amount of snow and rain the day of the event. So a lot of people wound up doing like 25 to 30 miles. We've got an aid station, but essentially it's an event that's designed to show people what they might expect in a winter ultra. So you have your required gear list. You practice melting snow so that you've got water to drink. We do an aid station. People get to bivvy out this year. We've changed locations because of the pandemic. So Saturday, February 6th at Owassipee Boy Scout Camp. It's in Twin Lake, Michigan. They've got, about 10 miles of groomed single track, plenty of forest roads and service roads, a lodge. But because of the pandemic, we're not going to be having people sleep in the lodge. Last year, they slept in cabins. This year, people will have to be bivvying or tenting up outside. But it's just a fun way to ask questions and figure out what's going to happen, what to expect, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, essentially.
I've heard nothing but good things about the shakedown, so it's really good to hear that it's still happening and that you're able to make it happen safely.
Yeah, I hope
That's
so.
fantastic.
Yeah, there will be changes, but we're gonna just roll with it and see what we can do and try to rally.
Cool, cool. That's pretty much all I had, but I know questions have been coming in. We got a bunch of questions early on when we posted that this was happening. Should we start taking questions from the audience?
Sure.
All right. Uh, First one that came in really early was from Instagram. If there are any children listening in or watching, I probably shouldn't say their handle, but it's a really good question. How did you keep your sleep system so dry? Or was it not
Um,
that dry, actually?
so I use it's the Marmot CWM negative 40-degree sleeping bag. And it's actually the third like winter sleeping bag that I've tried. I like it because it's got kind of like it's not waterproof, but it's got like a very water resistant outer to it. So there were actually nights when I slept inside of my sleeping bag, not even inside of my bivy. But I basically had like a 4-piece system um, to just kind of rotate through depending on the temperature or where I was sleeping. So my outermost layer was my outdoor research bivy. And so that's basically like this waterproof plasticky cocoon that keeps all the moisture from getting to your bag. And then I could put my negative 40-degree bag inside of it. And then I also had the Rab sleeping bag liner, which is it's like a vapor barrier liner that's plasticky, so it would keep all my moisture in my body, and then I can be inside of the insulating layer, and then I have the waterproof outer to help keep the moisture come in. And then I also had a Sea to Summit sleeping bag liner, which was basically just like a sheet, so that keeps the inside of your sleeping bag clean, and a clean bag is going to insulate better. But the liner was also really nice to use inside of like the top cot cabin that was 100 degrees, or anytime we were able to sleep inside of a building, it was nice to have that, just like a thin liner.
Yeah.
Um,
Again, you've got to be prepared for every temperature range, right? Or
yeah.
every part of the spectrum.
Mhm.
Anthony Robinson wants to know winter fat biking for beginners. How does a noob get started? I think you touched on this a little bit with the shakedown, but any quick tips or tricks for beginners?
I totally mooched off of everybody that I know who was already fat biking. So I asked a ton of questions. I make a lot of mistakes when I'm out there riding, and I every time I come back from a bike ride, I think what went wrong and how could I fix that? So that you just basically keep piling up like this list of things in your brain, how you can, better prepare. But also, I asked a lot of questions at the bike shop. I asked a lot of questions from people who had been riding before me. I experimented a lot. I, played around with tire pressure. I kept a logbook. So I would write down the temperature, humidity, and what tire pressure I was riding. That's really tedious at first, but then you wind up getting more and more of a hang of it. And so in the beginning of the winter, like there's always that weird time where you're trying to figure out what to wear or what tire pressure to run. So if I just like read back to some of my notes from prior years, then I know what personally works for me. Um, but as a beginner, I would say just, show up and ask questions. And like I remember at the start of some of my first fat bike races, we'd all, be lined up at the start, and then we'd be touching everybody's tire pressure to see what, everybody else is running. And so it's just through trial and error and through a lot of questions. Just don't be afraid to ask people, and yeah, feel free to shoot me a message, and I'll do my best to answer.
Excellent, thank you. And actually, the funny thing, I reread the question as you were answering, and so you've already answered another question that's come
Yes.
up. But I read through Anthony's question too quickly. Winter fat bike packing.
Oh.
So tips or tricks for a noob just getting out there for like their first overnight or something like
Start small. Give yourself an out. Um, so like with the winter bike packing stuff, like you don't always have to sleep in your bivy. One of the things that my husband and I like to do for date night is we've got a buddy who's got some land a little bit outside of town. So I'll load my bike up and I'll go out for a bike ride, and I'll ride out to Sean's Woods, and my husband will be there with the dogs and a tent and dinner. And so essentially I get the practice of riding and of getting sweaty, and then I get the practice of putting on dry clothes and starting a fire. But luckily he's carried, some of our gear out there, or he's taken fruit out there. Um, or just start small with a bike ride and stop and break out your camp stove and make coffee. So it doesn't always have to be like 100-mile ride just to start. Like you can just build up to it.
that. That is great advice. Thank you. Alex Price, on the ITI, how did you manage your lights and batteries in the cold for such an extended period of time? What did you do? And an additional question is, what did you do to keep your water from freezing?
Ooh,
So,
good ones.
batteries on your lights first, I guess.
Yeah. Um, so I carried kind of like a little tool keg, and I would keep spare batteries in this. But I didn't do a lot of rechargeable things. Where is my light? Oh, I thought I had my light. I use the Night Rider front headlights. It's only 200 lumens, but it uses two AA batteries. And you can get like 25 hours of use with that light. So in the snow and with the light reflecting off of the white snow and everything like that, you don't need a lot of lumens. And I actually made a mistake. I have some super bright like LED USB rechargeable Night Rider lights that I brought, like 1800 lumens, because I thought I would be riding by myself. But I also took like a portable USB power bank with me too. So anytime I'd get to a town, I'd charge stuff up, like charge my phone. But with the 200 lumen battery operated light, it was definitely enough light to keep riding, especially if it was a clear night. Like the moon definitely, it cast a shadow because the moon gets so bright in the snow. But I just took everything with batteries, and I packed batteries in all of my drop boxes, and I carried a ton of batteries with me. So you were just constantly swapping them out. I tried to keep an eye on my batteries so that I didn't have to change them in the cold. I tried to change them and plan ahead and do it when it was dry.
Gotcha.
Yeah, my Garmin is battery operated. It uses two AA's, and then the trackers that we took were AAA's. So you had to, remember to pack enough batteries for that, even though I didn't fly out with that tracker.
Okay.
So a lot of that, and then water. I know a lot of people use hydration packs, but a lot of hydration packs are pretty bulky. So like I'm only 5'2.5", and if I try to wear like the Revelate Designs like Wham pack or like some of the other like winter bags, they're so bulky.
Yeah,
And yeah. And it can like, especially if you're struggling, you're already heavy bike through a lot of deep snow, having a backpack and all that extra weight on your back can cause your upper body to fatigue. So I do a lot of insulated type containers, and I get so silly with these. I'll buy like 7 every winter and put them in the freezer and see how long, like how cold. I'll be like, oh, it's -5 degrees today. I'm gonna put this outside and see how long it'll last. So I would put this inside of my frame bag, and this is just a Stanley insulated thermos. And I just kind of lock it in there. If it got really cold, I'd hook a little hand warmer or like a toe warmer inside of my frame pack, and that helps to keep the inside of the frame good. Anytime we went inside anywhere, I took all of my water bottles with me. I didn't want to leave anything on my bike overnight for a chance that it might freeze. And I kept my camp stove pretty quick grab. So there were a couple times when I would run out of water and I would have to melt some snow. And then I just carried, like, I had these little insulated guys like all over my bike. Or you can put, there's so many different ways.
Yeah, so if you're melting snow, you're going to be getting warm water into your thermos, so it'll last that much longer before it freezes. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Cami Wade, during the times you were alone on the ITI, what did you do to conquer your fears, if you had any? And then going on, what you've accomplished in the sport and generally overall for women is monumental. Was there ever a moment out there on the course where you were able to actually feel the enormity of it? And what effect did that have on you?
I actually wrote down my answer for this because I saw this posted and I thought it was such a good question. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was a good one too. Sounds like I'm definitely pulling that.
Thanks, Cami. Cami went to the Winter Shakedown last year, and she was awesome to have around. So I was really excited to meet her. So there were a lot of moments when I felt just like how special the experience was. Just being a woman who's hanging out in the front with, the guys. I had a lot of times where I kind of like doubted myself and I felt like a little duckling, like following its parent, just like trying my best to keep up. Um, and there were a couple of times when I was just kind of like, this is ridiculous, like this is really hard. But I knew that everybody was like watching my little dot, and I didn't want to let people down. And I didn't want to let myself down either because I had spent so much time like preparing for it and wanting to get out there and wanting to do it well. But I just kept like I thought a lot about all the other strong women that I know. So I drew a little bit of like inspiration just from all these other amazingly strong, female riders. Um, but I didn't really have a lot of time to be afraid or to like I don't know, plan too much for the future. Because I was out there. Like there's not time to be afraid because you have to make smart choices. So you can't rush through things. But there were a lot of times where we would be safe inside of a shelter and I'd be like, holy cow, what did we just do? But like when you're in the moment, you just have to get through the moment. So like I didn't ever think that like I couldn't do it. I knew that I could, I just didn't know how fast I could. And I just knew that I needed to be smart. Um, but I just thought about everybody back home that was cheering me on and really excited. And I knew every day I got a little bit further, people were getting more and more excited. And I had to keep going. Like there was just like, there was no way. Like I couldn't come home and tell people like, oh yeah, you were so excited for me. Uh, I had to.
It makes sense. It's cool that you were able to sort of feed off the energy that was coming from, umpteen thousand miles away or whatever.
Yeah. It was anytime I like started doubting myself, I would just like immediately be like, what am I thinking? Like, I can't do that. I have to go.
Man, I don't think I'd have it in me. You're a monster. Anyone that does that, even attempts, is just an absolute monster. Um, Heather Bell, are there any other different ultras that you'd like to race that maybe you
Yeah.
haven't raced yet? Yeah. What are those?
Yeah. Um,
Are there any warm weather ultras? That's my question. Follow up.
yeah. I'm hooked. I wanna do as many winter ultras as I can. And I know that there's new ones popping up like every season, which is just like so exciting. But 45 North teammate Evan Simula went to was it Finland
Hmm.
for which fat bike
Oh,
race was that? The
wait.
no.
Iceland, right?
Uh
For
oh, that was recently. But one of the first ultras he did was in Finland, and that one sounded amazing. Um, the year that I did the 350-mile ITI, there was a woman from Norway who won it. And she's always said if I ever want to go out there, she'll take me for a bike packing tour,
oh,
which is what
nice.
she does is like her job. So I want to explore. It's one of the best ways to see these winter like wonderlands is on your fat bike. There were so many times in Alaska on the Iditarod Trail where there would be like mountains and just a beautiful sky and beautiful trees covered in snow, and I would just be really happy that I was there. So I want it all. I want like every winter ultra, even if you do the same one year after year, the snow conditions are going to change. It's never going to be exactly the same. So it just makes every time, really exciting and special. But yeah, I think was it the, I know I'm going to butcher this name. There's a new winter ultra out west. I think it's the Drift. That would be a really fun one to do. Going back to Fat Pursuit because it was so hard. Um, that would be really cool to go back now with what I know. Um, but I want to do summer bike packing now too. Um, I don't know. I haven't made up a decision yet, but I know
There
I want to do more.
so many options.
The world is our oyster.
Julia would like to know what is the perfect snack on a ride and why.
I also thought that
Yeah.
was a really good question.
I feel like
Um,
that could have a couple of answers depending on sort of the circumstances.
it really does. So I was actually vegetarian for about 15 years. And I started eating meat again before the Iditarod. I wanted to be able to just eat anything and everything that people handed me. So I think like one of the best foods for like on a winter ultra is just like whatever warm item somebody hands you when you walk into a checkpoint. Um, but for the Tuscobia 160 1 year, my sister-in-law made tamales for Christmas. So I took a bunch of tamales with me, like on the Tuscobia 160, and that was delicious.
That's a good
it was
one. Yeah.
it was so good. I'm a big fan of pizza when bike packing. You can like cram a couple pieces like in your back pocket in like tinfoil or something. But I think like for a winter ultra, for me, it works best if I'm eating real food and real snacks.
Sure.
I love bagels, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, um, just whatever real food you can get and a lot of it. And put a lot of butter in all of your food too, if you're up in Alaska. Your body just burns through everything.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Well, a great opportunity to just load up on butter.
Yeah, great.
Uh, you don't even have to feel guilty.
Mm-mm.
Another fun one, Michael Verbeek. How many sled dogs did you stop and pet?
Not as many as I wanted to. The sled dogs are amazing and they're so excited to be out there pulling their sleds. And just like a lot of the mushers ride fat bikes now too. So you would roll up to a checkpoint and all the dogs would start waking up and they'd get all excited. But they're supposed to be like sleeping and napping and recovering. But they want to go play because they see a fat bike and they get so excited. Um, so I was trying to be really respectful and it was really hard. I wanted to pet every single dog. They're all so cute. I picked up a ton of booties alongside of the trail. I came home with like 23 of these.
Holy cow.
And they're all different colors. I'm totally ruining some people's Christmas surprises, but I want I made up a song whenever I was in like a rough spot. And so it was like, if you're having a hard time, pick up a booty and think of a cutie to give it to. So, so I sang that a lot, and I have a lot of booties. But I did wash them all. A lot of them get really gross on the side of the trail.
Yeah.
But it was just, I mean, it was a souvenir. So
23 of them or whatever.
I know like 23 cuties who are going to get booties. So
That I don't think anyone else getting interviewed post ITI will have that answer to, what helped you get through. A song I made up about picking up dog booties.
yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's good. That's fantastic. These are the tricks we need to hear about.
Yeah, all the stuff they don't
Um,
train you for.
and then Michael also asked, I mean, there was mention of what gear kept you warm, but I think we probably plugged 45 North products enough already, and your sleep system.
Yeah.
Um, did you have any mechanicals out there?
Um, sort of. So I've had tubeless tires go flat on me before in winter ultras. So I swore going tubeless off for the longest time. And I took tubes and rode with tubes in my tires in Alaska. But because of the constant inflating and deflating of the tires, my tube started rubbing on the inside of my tire and it kind of created like this dusty kind of material on the inside. But it basically, all of the friction wore tiny little holes inside of my tube and I started getting slow leaks. So the first slow leak that I had in my tire was in the rear tire, and that was just coming up to Roan. So that was before McGrath, and I had to put a spare tube in, and it held for the rest of the 1,000 miles. But then when we got to Caltag, my front tire had slow leaks in it, and we got to sleep inside of a gymnasium. So I got to bring everything. Like we got to wheel the entire bikes inside of this gym, and Casey and Peter had to help me get the valve stem out of my rim. It like somehow like weirdly fused. So I was really happy to have the warmth. I started getting a slow leak at like the very best time. But then I popped a new tube in the front and I was fine there too. So that was a weird thing. Peter had a mechanical, his rear hub kind of seized on him and like just kind of exploded. And so he had to take like a strap, like a nylon strap, and he just like strapped his cassette to his spokes, and he rode like fixed gear for like 3 days until we were able to get like new hub parts shipped for him. So that was incredible.
Oh, wow. Okay,
It was not on a Velocity hub either. It was not a Velocity hub.
of course not.
No.
Things are bomb proof.
Yeah, they are.
Everybody out there,
Yeah.
Velocity Hub.
Yeah. But no, I was really lucky. Everything held up pretty well for me. My hand pump did break before I got to McGrath because I was putting so much air in my tire before I changed the tube in Roan. So my plastic hand pump broke. And Kate Coward, who won the 350-mile ITI, she actually let me borrow her hand pump for the rest of the ride. So that was pretty awesome. And that one did not break.
Good.
Yeah.
Obviously, for those who don't know, both Jill and I like Velocity Hubs. Jill happens to work there.
I work there.
Melinda GT would like to know, did you get to see the Northern Lights?
No,
Oh,
but I know. I was really looking forward to it. I've been to Alaska 3 times now, and I have not seen the Northern Lights in Alaska any of the times I've been up there. So I feel like I need my money back.
Dear
But
Alaska.
yeah, dear Alaska, don't short me the Northern Lights. I heard actually that there was a big storm, and you may possibly be able to see the Northern Lights tonight if you are
Well,
in like,
depends on where you're at. I
yeah,
don't know where
true.
our audience is, but yeah, you and I, Minnesota,
You're in the
Wisconsin,
Midwest.
Michigan.
Yeah,
If you get far enough out and there isn't a lot of light noise around you, I think we can see them. Yeah,
yeah. They were supposed to be out last night too, but it was too cloudy in Michigan, so that's a bummer.
I will be walking outside after this interview. I'm
Same.
curious. Um, Susan Hayes, can you have support or do you have to manage everything alone? I think we've already covered that. You know, you do get support from locals to
Hmm.
some extent. It's not like you have a massive off-road vehicle with mechanics
No.
and tools chasing you or
Yeah.
anything, but yeah.
Yeah. Winter ultras are like the most boring thing for my husband to come and watch because he's not allowed to like even hug me. Oops.
Um, Carrie Ann Gibbons, question colon, you're awesome, Jill. Fire.
Carrie is awesome.
I'm not sure that's a question, but it's good anyway. Oh, Brian Miller, can you explain the southern route that you mentioned?
Yeah. So every year the Iditarod race switches between the northern route and the southern route. You'll have to go to the Iditarod Trail Invitational website to see like the actual map. But essentially, both routes follow the same route to McGrath, and then the northern route, the route that we did, goes up through Cripple and goes up. along the coast before continuing onwards, versus the southern route kind of dips below after McGrath and then reconnects in Unalakleet and continues along the coast. So on on even years they do the northern route, and on odd years they do the southern route. Tracy Peterberry, I believe, is the only woman who has done both the southern and the northern. Jill Homer, I believe, has also done it. And I'd have to look to see if other women have. I don't know. I haven't heard which one is better. I really enjoyed the northern route.
Just going to have to find out when the southern route comes back along. Alex, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try your last name. Alex K. How many miles do you ride each week? Like roughly.
Yeah, so I like to go off of hours instead of mileage, just because with the snow, you never know what those conditions are going to be. So I try to shoot for like 15 hours a week while I'm maintaining kind of like my fitness level. And then once, about a month or so before, I like to shoot for 20 to 25 hours a week. And then I give myself a good 3 to 4 weeks to taper kind of down before like a big event like that.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
More hours than I've put in. Maybe I need to get to work.
But I count dog runs, I count bike rides, hikes. So
Okay, that helps a little, but still.
yeah.
Aaron Brooks, this is a good one. What sorts of tools and spare parts do you pack for a trip like that?
Yeah. So the hand pump, multi-tool. I actually usually carry 2 or 3 multi-tools with me. Sometimes somebody needs one, and it's easier to just hand them a tool instead of carrying, or instead of waiting for them to be done. I carried 2 spare tubes, master link, a chunk of chain. I'll carry a rear derailleur hanger, some like the polylube, the Park Tool polylube grease. I'll carry extra bolts. I'm just kind of looking at my bike to think of all the things that I bring. Extra valve stems, extra valve cores, a valve core remover tool, safety pins. I'll bring some duct tape, fire starter, a little bit of that carbon paste, just in case you readjust some stuff. Yeah, and then extra batteries, Vaseline, just a whole pile. Basically, any part on your bike. I probably carry way too much stuff with me, but I like to be prepared. So.
How much does your bike weigh fully loaded?
Mine was 72 pounds. And that was without all my water and without like a day and a half or 2 days or 3 days worth of food. So.
Wow. Okay, well, maybe we can figure out right now if you carry too much. How does that compare with some of your, I don't want to call them competitors, but your friends out on the same ride?
My champion buddies.
Yeah, your champion buddies. Are they all on 72-pound rigs as well?
So Peter carried a lot of stuff, and his bike was in the 80-pound range.
Okay.
And but if you think about it, like Peter and Casey are so much taller than me, and like they get bigger bikes. Like I get like 1 water bottle inside of my frame bag because it's an extra small.
Oh, yeah, good point. Well, and I mean, your weight to your bike weight ratio has to be, I mean, you're pushing almost yourself.
Yeah.
And those guys, their bike is only half of what they weigh. So, yeah.
Casey's bike was lighter. I think his was closer to 70 pounds. Then Peter was in the 80 range, and I was 72. But Casey kept saying that too. He was like, "You have to carry the same amount of stuff as me, and your bike is way smaller." I think Casey was on like an extra large bike or a large bike.
Wow. It's impressive that you're able to just fit everything on there.
Yeah.
Um, what else do we have? Oh, Kathy Browning. How did you? Well, I think we kind of know the answer to this a little bit, but how do you get motivated to leave your warm cocoon in the morning? And how many nights did you spend in a bivvy versus staying in villages?
Okay, so the first night on the way to McGrath, Missy Schwartz, and Jamie and I bivvied out, and then we continued on. And Jamie and I found like a tree hole to sleep in. So essentially, the snow is so deep, uh, but there was like a cave kind of around the trunk of a tree. So we like
Hmm.
climbed into this little cave and had to sleep like sitting up. And that was a baby night. And then um, and then I slept in the Roan checkpoint, and then in the Nikolai checkpoint. I would say uh, there's maybe 5 or 6 times, maybe closer to six, seven, more if you count naps. Because I would just
Okay,
like lay down on the side of the trail and sleep until I got cold, and then like wake up and keep going. And a lot of that was in like broad daylight, which I always laughed about because it would be funny if people saw me. Um, but I would say maybe like 6 times we bivvied outside through the night, and then the remainder of times was either in like shelter cabins, which may or may not have had wood to burn, and then they would put you up either in bed and breakfasts, which were basically somebody's house, and you got to sleep on a cot or on the floor in the living room, surrounded by like all the pilots and like the journalists who were following the Iditarod sled dog race. There were a couple times when we slept inside of like the Iditarod checkpoint tents. So essentially, it's like a big wall tent where they put the sick dogs. But luckily, like we never stayed with sick dogs. The dogs were all pretty healthy.
that's
Um, yeah, yeah. It was almost too warm the second half of the race for the sled dogs, but
oh
they
wow,
yeah, they put us in this wall tent, and it was like there was so much condensation on the inside that like the walls were basically like raining on us throughout the entire night.
that's not fun.
So it was, yeah, it was warm, but it was like a lot a lot of moisture.
Wow. Um, skipping through some. I should actually shout out to Mandy who asked how much did the full load weigh. I actually accidentally asked that. Brandon Eddie would like to know what socks and boots did you wear? If we want to do another shameless plug, that's
Sure.
totally fine.
Yeah. Um, so I wore my 45 North socks. um, so essentially, I took 3 different pairs of wool socks with me. I took a very thin base layer sock, and then I took kind of like a mid-weight wool sock, and then I took my knee-high wool socks. So basically, the theme of everything is a lot of wool because it still keeps you warm and insulates even if it's wet. I also took a pair of Rab vapor barrier socks. So if your foot sweats, it's going to sweat into your boot, and then your boot is going to get wet. And if you take your boots off, it could freeze, or it's going to be a little bit chillier. So I would do a base layer sock, the vapor barrier sock, and then plug that inside my 45 North Wolfgar boots. And the vapor barrier just contains all that sweat to your foot so that you don't get your boot wet. So it's warmer the next time you have to put it on. And then I had an extra pair of socks that I carried with me that I would only use in case of emergency. Essentially, like if I did get very wet and I was in danger, if I fell through some ice or something, I would always have a dry outfit on my bike. But yeah, those 3 socks I just kept rotating through and then changing depending upon the weather and how I was feeling. Everything
Cool.
smelled great.
I'm sure. Actually, that's a good transition. Mentioning wool and vapor barriers and how you manage sweat. Linda Thompson Peter, I'm guessing. Uh,
Powder.
Potter. Okay,
With
so
LTP,
we know
it's
this.
actually her birthday today. So
Oh, happy birthday, Linda. Uh, you might already know this about her then. She says, I sweat so much when I ride, even when it's cold. What tips do you have for layering for multi-days, and how do you dry things?
yeah. So the cool thing about drying stuff is that your body heat will naturally evaporate some moisture from your wool layers. So anytime you crawl into your sleeping bag, if you've got some damp items, take them in there with you, and your body heat will dry them out. Not like dry them out fully, and if they're sopping wet, you probably don't want to take them into a wool sleeping bag. Um, but essentially, if you are stopping for the night and you're sweaty, you can crawl inside of your sleeping bag and it'll kind of evaporate a little bit for you. But a lot of times when we stopped in shelters or checkpoints or aid stations, I'd immediately take the wet stuff off and put on my dry layers. Patagonia makes this Capilene Air base layer, which is like a knitted wool, and it actually dries really incredibly fast. I was really impressed with it. So I would wear the 45 North short sleeve merino wool tee and then that Capilene Air base layer over top of it. Every morning I started out chilly, but once I started moving, I started warming up. Um, so always start cold. Uh, take the time to stop and unzip. If you start to feel sweaty, don't let yourself, get sopping wet. Um, Sounds like LTP might benefit from some vapor barriers too, and to contain that sweat to, just like a thin layer so that it's not seeping and getting everything else wet.
Mhm.
Um, but I try my best to practice with the different layers to figure out what works best for me. Everybody is different. And then another funny fact, I actually stopped drinking in the winter now.
Okay.
So alcohol, it dehydrates you. And so if I don't drink my alcohol, then I'm drinking more fluids and I'm staying better hydrated. So I've actually found last winter was the first winter that I stopped drinking for the winter because I wanted to stay better hydrated. Uh, but I found like oddly I sweat less. Um, and I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. Um, but for me, like staying better hydrated and then just taking layers on and off, um, that helped me to not be so damp while riding.
If there are any doctors watching, please explain that
Yeah,
one to us if you
please
know.
advise.
Um, I just realized we're already over an hour and I don't want to keep you too long. I know it's 9 o'clock where you're at. One last question before we go, because I think it's a good one. You mentioned that the moose were so aggressive. John Clemo wants to know how many did you see?
um, I don't know how many I saw, but the most memorable, there was a moose in McGrath, um, but essentially um, the entire trail leading up to McGrath was full of post holes where all the moose had walked. So it
Hmm.
was really bumpy, and post holes are like my kryptonite when I am riding on a fat bike course. Like I can push and hike all day long, but if there's bumps from moose hooves, like I get so mad. So there was a moose in McGrath who actually like walked right up to the house and started licking Casey's gaiters in his saddle and like chewing on his pogies. So that moose was pretty awesome. We were all like inside watching it and like just being like, oh. Um, and then there was one moose in the trail that I came up on, and I had to stop and just sit there and wait until it, walked away. So it was mostly the moose. The moose footprints were everywhere. Um, and then a lot of the moose that I saw were further away too, but there were like a lot more than I expected to see.
That's crazy. I would not want to run into one of those, especially in conditions where I can't. exactly
No,
get away anytime quickly.
no.
Um, cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I know that there's still a lot of questions that are unanswered. Any chance you would be willing over the course of maybe, tomorrow or the weekend popping in and helping answer some that we didn't get to?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to.
Thank you so much. So yes, those still watching, sorry we didn't get to you, but your questions will be answered in time.
Mhm.
Any final shout outs before we go?
Um, I mean, obviously thanks to my sponsors. Truthfully, I really wouldn't. I I don't know. I just feel really lucky that 45 North has me as an athlete. I feel so lucky to be riding for Salsa. I feel lucky to be riding with the Velocity wheels and working there, and that my employer gave me an entire month off to go and chase this adventure. So I
That's
just
pretty
feel
rad.
I feel just really lucky and really excited, and I want to see more people out doing these winter ultras and bike packing. It's exciting to me. I like it.
Cool. Well, I mean, you're doing your part. You're hosting the shakedown and getting more people out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody listening.
Yes,
Good
thank you
night.
everybody listening. All right. Yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know how to sign off of this. The control room has to do that for me. So
Mhm.
thank you again and have a lovely evening.
Mhm.